Hello and welcome to our Blood and Ashes bonus episode. In December, we participated in the WoTaHoliday charity stream that ran for 24 hours with a number of other Wheel of Time content creators, and Willie and I managed to fill an entire hour talking about the strike at Shayol Ghul. Unfortunately, Jody wasn't able to join us for this one, but Willie and I went through the short story in summary, and we spoke at length about some of the aspects that we liked and maybe had to puzzle out a bit, much like our regular episodes. So we thought maybe some of you would enjoy this little bit of lore deep dive. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. If you don't know already, we are the Blood and Ashes podcast. My friend over here, Willie, and our other missing leg of our what should I call it, dysfunctional tripod
trio
is unfortunately not able to join us this evening. But Willie and I will be diving in, as Rob said, into the short story called The Strike at Shayol Ghul, which is all about the events leading up to Lews and Telemon taking the 100 companions to Shayol Ghul and sealing the Dark One away in his prison. This is a short story that I read years ago, and I think I even had it like printed on a piece of paper. Like it was really hard to come by, and now it's just hosted all over the net, including on Dragonmount, which is where we have read it now recently. But for those of you that don't know our podcast, I should warn you that neither Willie nor myself are, shall we say, scholars of the Wheel of Time. We've both read the series a couple of times, but we are by no means experts. So the shape of this conversation will mostly be us discussing and trying to figure out some stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense. So if you do have any input that you want to deliver and sort of clear things up for us, or have any questions of your own, stick them in the chat. Willie will be monitoring the chat as we go along. And
that'll do.
Hopefully we can figure this thing out together. As I'm sure you've been told a number of times, all the donations from the stream are going to the Lightweaver Foundation, as Elliot just covered again on his stream, which is a charity established in joint partnership between Brandon and Emily Sanderson and Dragonsteel. And they do all sorts of stuff. And I think the most recent project they were working on was providing learning aids and literary works to those who can't come by them, which is a worthy cause. Follow the link on the stream to make a donation. I mean, if you can justify spending money on a pint of beer, you can probably justify spending this at least the same amount on getting someone that doesn't have the advantages that we have, the books and the materials that they need.
Even better yet, it's the cost of a pint of beer, and you can win 8 glasses to put those pints into. That's a win-win.
It sure is. So what Willie's alluding to here is that everyone that makes a donation gets one entry into a raffle. At the end of the whole live stream, the raffle will be done, and the winner of that raffle will win 8 frosted beer mugs with, I think, Rob said there are 13 different content creator themed beer mugs from which you can choose 8, and they will ship that off to you. Those of you that are most active in the chat will also get a mention or a nomination at the end. Well, I say those. The one person that is most active in the chat during our block will get a free entry into that raffle as well. So, with all of that out of the way,
5 minutes
let's
done.
Get stuck in.
We like to ramble, and we got to ramble about the story
Yes.
Because I've got many points to sit and pick on. So let's get it going.
Before spoiler and explicit language warnings, we should warn everyone that we do ramble. So, Willie, you're also going to have to remind me to keep an eye on the clock to make sure we actually get through this. I know it's only a couple of paragraphs, the short story itself, but we really do run the risk of running over. So we'll try and hem it in where we can. Anything else we need to cover, Will, before we get stuck in?
No, we've done all the T's, dotted the I's. Let's get it on.
All the table setting. Okay. So the short story I mentioned is called the strike at Shayol Ghul. And at least where it's hosted on Dragon Mount, it comes with a foreword written by Robert Jordan himself, in which he's basically just saying that people want to hear a lot of stories from the sort of the Age of Legends and sort of all the ancillary eras and times referenced within the actual mainline story. But he was saying at the time that he didn't really have any plans to write any of those stories, but he said, sometimes a story might slip out, like a small one like this. And he makes a self-deprecating joke about his editor saying, you can't write short fiction. Your version of short fiction is 50,000 words or something along those lines. But he goes, this is his attempt at writing just a short little bit to appease those fans that do like things about specifically the Age of Legends. I already have comments, Willie. I've started to talk about the fact that we have a foreword has already made me think there's something to say here. To me, it feels like just because there's a Robert Jordan foreword that is linked to the reading of the story every time lends it the credibility that it needs, so that it's not discarded as like fan fiction or speculative, speculation. It's such a short, it's not even a short story. It's like a short text that it could easily be dismissed as like, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. And it sits so far in the past that it's not directly linked. But the foreword, I think, makes it official.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a quick essay, if any, if that. And
in a weird
forward
format,
does make it official. Very, very, because we do have all these little prophecies and readings with the start of every book, and sometimes at the end of a book, where you get a little thing by some high counselor of something of somewhere that will chime in their version of a prophecy or a history recording or whatever it is. But this is a very official. It is a prequel. It is number one, the first prequel in the series. So if now in the chat, let us know, has any of you guys read it? Are everyone up to speed and up to the literally caught up to this already? So give us a little bit of feedback there.
Also, it's fine if you're not, because we'll go through the main hits of the story, and then we'll elaborate on the points that we think need a bit of elaboration, but there will be a summary. So don't worry if you haven't read it. But if you have read it, help us out here, because there's a couple of things in here that I know already have given us some reasons to scratch our heads a little. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the framing of the story as well, which is also interesting. It's not just a straightforward Lews Theron woke up one morning and decided to steal the Dark One away in the bore. It's written from an in-fiction point of view, from the point of view of a royal historian in Kandor called Joril Mondevan.
That's how you're going to say it, Joril Mondevan. Yep,
that's close enough.
We agree on that at least.
And she is also, she's not the one writing the account. Obviously, Kandor, being one of the nations present in current time in Randland, it is not pre-breaking or Age of Legends related at all. And Joril is writing a paper, it seems, because it's introduced as a partial introduction to another literary work that this historian is writing. And the contents of her story is based on this manuscript that was found in a chest in a dusty storeroom somewhere in Kandor, in amongst
it is written like it's a reporter reporting for a local newspaper. I found this, investigated this, I verified this type of claims. It's kind of like her stating her name on there and also doing it for the Queen of Kandor at that time.
Yes.
Almost solidifies it like, hey, this is an official capturing of information that goes back 3,000 years. They speak of the paper being foxed and completely run, but not quite turned to dust yet, so not crumbled up. So, I mean, this is old bits and pieces of paper. Then, as you say, rightly, with between receipts that was found, it's kind of that I need to keep this, but put it in that file 13. And file 13 often has receipts of and something you bought that you think you might have to take back to the fishmonger or whatever, what people kept receipts for in those days. I don't know.
So, I mean, other things in this chest that this was found in, right? So you find this manuscript, some receipts, inconsequential, but also students' copybooks and What was the other thing? It was personal diaries.
Mm.
So that collection of stuff, I mean, the receipts are kind of they don't really have an effect on what you find there, but the combination of this historical work, it's a manuscript, it's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. It's been copied over 3,000 years, right? Because the original was, I think, printed, they say, 100 years after the breaking. And it's obviously in bad shape, like you just said, Vil, but they're dealing with like translation issues and the fact that it was copied so many times. These are all things that they, as the historians in Candor, have to take into account. And it was found in a storeroom in the capital, in Chachin, is how I'm going to pronounce that. Chachin. I don't know how fancy you want to get with it.
Ching ching.
But Chachin, I found, is also actually quite interesting in itself, in that nobody actually knows how old the city is. It's not Ogier built. It's not Aes Sedai built, so you can safely assume it was human-made. And even though it doesn't feature much in the main storyline, apparently it rivals Tyr in size. It's a big city, and it sits on a main, like a confluence of a number of trade routes, and specifically a trade route along the borderlands. So many people would have traveled through there. So this chest with like diaries and receipts and this manuscript and like students' copybooks could speak, or I think is supposed to sort of speak to the fact that it was a scholar or someone that was interested in a topic, that was sort of researching stuff and taking notes and writing diaries and stuff. So it's cool. It's like this little chest of knowledge found in this dusty storeroom in Chachin. Like I said, the original history was from around 100 AB, which, correct me if I'm wrong, means 100 years after the breaking. After breaking is AB. Which leads me to another thing I was wondering about. They say specifically in this story that it seems like the technology for printing survived the breaking and was actually in some small ways, in very restricted environments, still actively being applied. So people were using printing, the printing press. But that made me think, like, were they using a printing press from an Age of Legends museum or something? Would a printing device or mechanism have any use in the true Age of Legends, which was technologically way advanced, right? I mean,
Well, it
flying
wasn't
cars
the
and a
display
printing
screen
press?
of a Joker, if you're asking that. So maybe there was a form of printer or printing press that survived that could be going on, but they could also be referencing, because this would have been translated from the Old Tongue. So we have to remember that in the translation from the Old Tongue into the current day Randland, a lot of words do mean different things. And it's also referenced in this document, and we'll get to it later, where some words mean two things. So maybe what they do refer to there is that the ability to write and pass on knowledge
maybe that
remained. Because, I mean, it is at the end of the day handwritten scrolls that are being found, diaries and that. So I would lean to the sense that at least in knowledge and education to this extent remained, that people could still read and write and pass on that bits of information, even the little bits that was left. To understand the devastation of the breaking is to really know everything got rocked down to the ground root. There was nothing left.
I mean, for those that don't follow the podcast, we just recently covered the chapters. We're rereading the books again and trying to like squeeze all the joy out of every single sentence and wring everything we can from it. But we just not too long ago read the part, or a part, I won't get too spoilery, but where there's a lot of flashbacks into the history of some of the older people roaming the lands. And that obviously has flashbacks go all the way to the Age of Legends and then through the breaking, and just seeing just recently how devastating the breaking really was, and how, you know, the human race was broken down to its most base instincts, how people just basically turned to barbarism and stuff. It was the breaking was total and utter, you know, falling to pieces of civilization. So
now,
anyway,
just to chime in there, you got to speed it up. Quarter of the way in, we have had some comments on now. In the interim, we have reached the 60% to the goal in terms of the monies that are being raised. So $4,500, we got to get to 5 in this hour. So everyone start emptying your wallets. That would be great. We do have a few people that's saying, wasn't there an iPhone terangrial at the time? No, there maybe was. Who knows? There were some devices for communication, I'm pretty sure, but they didn't survive.
I like Kev's comment about maybe someone had a rudimentary printing device during the breaking. And I mean, that's sort of where I have to lean as well when I think of the words used in the story. I mean, they use the word printing, which is, not ambiguous at all. So yeah, that's where I land as well. Anyway, so the manuscript was heavily damaged. There were 212 remaining pages. And apparently this was one of many volumes. So, other volumes, nowhere to be found, 212 pages remaining. If they deem that to be like, just a bit of the book, it must have been a mother effer of a volume if 212 pages is very few. But importantly and critically, the largest number of intact consecutive pages was 6. And nowhere else was there more than 2 pages that followed on each other. So that is pretty rough. The manuscript references dates that are completely incomprehensible because no calendars from the Age of Legends had ever been found. So all the dates and timestamps and references that they make in this manuscript are useless for anyone reading them now. Or I say now. When I say now, I mean around time. But even saying that, this one manuscript contained the single largest written account of the events during the War of Shadow. And crucially, sorry, Vil, last point, the 6 pages that are following on each other and those placed sort of near them in the original volume tell the account of how Lews Therin and 100 companions sealed the boar. And it is the only known source of that information.
Look, the general gist of it is that everything went lost due to the breaking. But the breaking itself, and more importantly, the drilling of the ball, had released evil into the world. The Dark One was set free, and his touch and his taint started affecting the world.
The drilling of the ball did.
Mind.
The breaking didn't have anything to do with that.
No, the breaking was part of the sealing. After they did the sealing, lashed out, and the taint was added onto the power. That caused the breaking. But in that evil being released, people became evil. People became divided. And and as you see, whenever one nation takes over another nation in current history, you will always find the destruction of books. The destruction of someone's history is a prominent part in reshaping a new world, if you want to do so. So there may be so little bit of this literature, even down to the calendars available, because it was purposefully destroyed. It was sought out and destroyed, is what I think. Because, I mean, there's very, very little left. But yeah, let's move it on.
Well, my note on that was just like, this is a good example of how history can be hijacked, right? Are we just supposed to believe this one account? If it's the only source of this information, how do we corroborate it? Is this actually true? I mean,
where there's smoke, there's usually a fire, I say. But
okay, I mean, it's food for thought.
It was stamped. It was by all accounts as this is the story. And again, word by
I can write that
stories
on anything.
Yeah.
I can write that on Peter Pan. Okay, so let's get to the meat of it. So what is this? What is the story actually conveying to us? I will do some broad strokes here. It took for Jarrell, or the historian writing this thing, says that it could have taken anything between 50 and 100 years for war to actually erupt after the boar was created. Because as we know, we see the boar being created during those flashback scenes I referenced earlier. And only generations later, it was Chan, that original Dashain Aiel, that saw, the Sharom, that huge floating sphere, shatter like an egg and crash into the city beneath it. And his great grandson was Kuman, who was the guy that was linked arm in arm with or standing in a big circle with the other Aiel and the Ogier, singing, the songs that the Tuatha and that the Tinkers are looking for right now, growing those fields of I forget now what the maize analog is. It was maize, yeah. But when he's busy with that ceremony, and after they've sung the song and the green man has walked through the field and everything is growing, afterwards he goes over to that soldier and he overhears him talking about they've just heard word that Lews Therin had taken the 100 companions and they sealed the ball and the war is over. So Chan saw the Sharom fall when the ball was created, and his great-grandson was there to hear the news of the war ending. I mean, Chan himself also caught wind of it, but he got the short end of the stick.
It stands in line with the thinking that it is a period that could be between 50 and 80 up to 100 years. You don't know how long the generations are and when people start having children, but if you think it's sort of in medieval terms, but which it wasn't, you'd say about having kids at 20, 3 generations, 4 generations, 20, 30, about 80 years.
Can't do that because in those Aiel flashbacks, Chan is referenced as a young man not yet getting grey hairs or something like that when he was 60.
True.
So time is weird. Anyway, we digress again. So when war did erupt after the ball was created, it took a little while because war itself needed to be invented. There was no such thing as war. And like you were alluding to before, the Dark One's presence in the world had started awakening these feelings in people, and it started changing and brought out the worst in people across the world. But when the war itself had erupted, so the War of the Shadow or the War of Power, as it's often called, initially there was a 3-year period where the Shadow made great advances while the forces of the light were still scrambling. Like, what the fuck is war? What are we doing? Trying to get the act together.
Yeah, but they had to invent war, literally.
Exactly.
It wasn't a thing. We never needed this thing. We lived under the trees of peace, and everyone was high on trees.
Everyone was breathing the Chora or Aventusora leaves fumes and being tranquil and relaxed all the time. But after the initial 3 years where the Shadow was making a lot of advances, in the next 4 years, the light really fought back, and they pushed back quite a lot. But that eventually petered out into what became a bit of a stalemate between the forces of the light and the forces of the shadow. Eventually, when that stalemate broke, it was the shadow that started making advances. First slowly, but then slowly increasing speed and then gathering momentum. And it became obvious that the armies of the shadow, which we should remember is not just Trollocs and Madral, it's human armies of the shadow as well. They
people
apparently
turned to the dark. They accepted this as the near, and this really spilled out. There were people sitting on the fence, like maybe we should have a treaty, have a little peace talk about it.
That's how the war actually broke out in the first place, when there were enough people declaring for the shadow to create an army for the shadow. They challenged the light en masse, and that's how war broke out. So the leaders of these shadow armies were willing to let vast numbers of the population die or just starve in the pursuit of this final victory. So they just cast their people aside and just went, okay, we need to beat the light. And they pushed really hard.
Well, they also needed humans to do all those experiments on, to create all the shadow spawn. That needed some people to come over to their side.
And plenty of those. So the forces of light at this point were having their hands forced, right? They needed to do something. So Lews Therin came up with this plan. He said, let's go to Shayol Ghul, where there is what they call a thinness in the pattern, where the bore is more detectable. Let's go there. Pause. Interesting that Shayol Ghul is where they would go, and not necessarily the site of the Sharom and the Column Dan, that huge university, which was in the city of Visain. So that's where they drilled into.
Drilling of the bore is, well, they drilled it there using the tools, the Sharom. But it's not a physical drill that did physical drilling. It's with a power and with weaves. So, I mean, if you think about it in a fantasy context, if it's something that you would go into, you'd envision it being into the ground. So drilling is a good metaphor to use for it. So maybe there's just this plumed pocket of surface level power where they could go. It's like, okay, that area, you're a little bit closer. Like gravity is stronger in certain planets of planet Earth. There's areas where the gravity is just that little bit stronger, depending on where you are to the Earth's molten liquid core, and others just a little bit lighter. But that area had a much stronger presence of
Mm.
the one power.
What makes it more confusing is that they often use terminology that evoke physical or tangible things, right? Like they talk about like the bore originally was small, but it's getting bigger. And, like we could tear it open, and they use the word tear, like, so it evokes this image of a hole in a membrane or in in fabric or something like that. The pattern,
Yep.
if you wanted to get real fantasy about it. So anyway, so Lewis Theron's plan is like, guys, let's go to Shayol Ghul. The pattern is thin there. We can sense the bore. Let's create a circle, the most powerful circle that we can muster, with, I think it was 7 women and 6 men.
Yep.
Circle of 13. We'll take these Quaindiar seals to anchor the seals, 7 of them. And we go there, and we go with 20,000 soldiers. We just charge at Shayol Ghul. We go do this big old channel session, and we place these seals just so to seal up the bore completely.
Basically, patching the internet connection that is leaking where fish fit in a hole in the underground river running the bottom of the ocean. Something like that, but not quite the same. Same, but different.
Sure, yeah, exactly like that. So, 9LZ, would you call that a power drill? Yes, I guess you would. So, this plan was deemed extremely risky for a couple of reasons. One, that the Dark One can actually, or could, affect the world near Shayol Ghul and around it. And that's true all the way through to our story, right? Like, I mean, the seals are obviously weakening, and the Dark One's influence is growing because of that weakening of the seals. But he would immediately sense anyone channeling around there, and would immediately destroy the entire what do they call it, like an escort, like, people nowadays would think 20,000 men is an army, but in that time it was deemed sort of like not an honor guard, but
a companionship.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah, a guard of some kind. Anyway, they would all be destroyed if anyone channeled anywhere near Shayol Ghul, because the Dark One would sense it. Lewis Theron even said that even if we're successful, chances of anyone coming back from this is almost zero, right? So this is not just a suicide mission. It's a mass suicide mission, right? Like, it's 20,113 people suicide mission. The other risk they ran is if they placed the seals incorrectly, they could tear the bore wide open,
the whole thing open, and
everything would just spill out into the world, and we'd all be fucked. So obviously there was some reticence within the Hall of Servants to say, I don't know if this is a good idea, and they came up with a counter plan. Not a counter plan, but an alternative, which was to create these basically that's what it amounts to. These 2 giant sa'angreal, the Kudenkaal. Now, again, listeners, viewers, sorry about the pronunciation, but that's how I've pronounced it since I was 17 years old. So that's what's going to come through to your earballs now.
That's the only way that you pronounce it. There's nothing wrong with that.
I've been saying that to you for years. That's why you're used to it. But they was basically saying create these 2 massive sa'angreal, those giant statues that you read about quite early in the books, holding those crystal spheres that are just capable of drawing such an immense amount of the power that, first of all, no Aes Sedai would be able to use that directly. So they had to build these little access keys to sort of allow them to access the larger sa'angreal, so that they could channel so much power to just hit the Dark One's armies head on and decimate them, get all the way to where the bore is, and then basically weave some kind of shield around it to contain the Dark One. Until such time, like you said, they were just buying time, until such time as they could think of a more suitable way to deal with him.
There's confusion about your earballs comment.
Earballs, doesn't everyone have earballs?
It's earballs over there.
Yeah. So Lewis Theron and his supporters thought that this was a bad idea, because their counter argument would be that if you put the shield around the bore, we already knew that the bore itself was getting bigger. It was bigger than when it was drilled
the
originally.
bubble is going to leak full. What's going to happen when the whole thing is
it's going to fill up? Well, how do bombs work, right?
Yeah.
build
Then you got
pressure
a
on the
big
inside
thing to
until it,
fix.
yeah. So I mean, that's his argument, right? Like, we can't do this because this is absolutely not going to work. The dark one's still going to grow in strength within that thing, and how do you know you're ever going to be strong enough to actually seal it up? So anyway, already a bit of a schism here. So the two different plans really did divide the Hall of Servants, to the point of them being sort of like openly hostile towards each other. And there was one woman that emerged as the champion for the Coudencarl plan, an Aes Sedai named Latra Pose Decume.
Very well pronounced.
Oh, thank you.
I would have
I knew
nailed
her,
that.
that's why.
Mates. Yes, mates.
What we know is that, in the Age of Legends, if they had those three names like Lews, Theron, Telemon, it meant that they were someone of, some considerable standing. It was quite an honor to have three names. And Latra Pose Decume had three. So she was obviously someone of some influence, and she became the leader of the opposition to Lews Theron's plan.
Some massive influence. A lot of theories that we need to get on because we are now halfway in time. But I just quickly want to dive into this division. We have, through the turning of the wheel, division in the Aes Sedai. We see it coming again in the tower. And at this time, there's division. The ball being open and the touch of the Dark One being out there. Is that playing into the people's minds that division is a natural part? We know that Shayol Ghul, before it was, and I forget the name of the city, fell to itself under Aradol, fell to itself, and the people basically being consumed by, again, division. So is that not one of the first bit of evil that gets out there that creates that divide and conquer
100%.
thing? You feel that's there?
100%. I think there are multiple references throughout the story and material that as soon as the Dark One started being able to affect the world, suddenly you have the concept of war, people turning on each other. There's references to sword play being an act, or like a form of entertainment, a dance that they eventually turned into a method to kill each other, and which is why a lot of the sword forms are referred to as a dance. Lews Theron and Demandred, I think, reinvigorated it. It used to be just a sport or something into an actual method of killing. So yes, absolutely. I mean, people basically got worse after they opened up this hole to a realm of evil. So stands to reason. Let's push on. So Latra Pose Decume gained a large number of supporters, but what eventually made her cause triumph over the sealing plan of Lews Theron was what they called the Fateful Concord, an agreement between all the female Aes Sedai of significant strength. They said that Lews Theron's plan was too rash and too dangerous, and the cost of failure would be way too high, obviously, opening the thing up all the way. So Lews Theron's plan also required the use of a circle, which needs to be led by a woman. So the construction
has to be initiated by a group of women.
So now all the women that are strong enough to participate in Lews Theron's plan have signed this Fateful Concord. They're not going to do Lews Theron's plan, and therefore the Hall of Servants moved to have the construction of the Coudencarl rushed forward. So there's a note at the bottom of the story, sort of like postulating, like, if the women had agreed and they went to the ball with the men, would the men have been protected from the final sort of lashing out of the Dark One? Or worse, would the male and the female half be tainted and no one would be able to channel again? So
Lews Theron was one of the most powerful ta'veren that has been known in that age. And that ta'veren nature, I think you have to believe, played into it that they went alone as men, because there was that essence of luck, suppose, involved there. You would want to think, because it's classic. Like Gandalf fought the Balrog, got him to fall into the depths of hell, and then he got lashed out at, in the same way that Lews Theron got lashed out at. So I do believe that it would have, if they had gone as a team of 13 to create that circle, they would have, the entire Seidan and Saidar would have been tainted, and all of that would have been lost in madness.
They also refer to Lews Theron in this text as the dragon from prophecies. So even Lews Theron was prophesied to do something. So he's also
It was just
following
another
his
turning
fate.
of the wheel.
Exactly.
Just another turning of the wheel.
So then they've got like, okay, big project Kudenkahl. Let's make these giant, powerful statues. But then disaster strikes. So just as the Sa'angreal are completed, the Terangreal access keys were busy being made far away from the actual Sa'angreal themselves because of resonance interference issues. But the lands in which the Kudenkahl access keys were being created were taken over by Samael's forces, and the Aes Sedai lost access to the access keys. And that obviously was a massive, massive problem, because now they had these giant Sa'angreal created, but they had no way of actually using them. So they're just sitting there. So Lutheran came back and...
It's speculated that they did not know that it was there. They just took the area. Samael took the area, but it was so secret that they kept that between the top few, that this is being made and we're going to do it off-site in a secret workshop, probably in some left out backbone country that they just took for the strategic purposes. Like, okay, cool, we'll flank them on the left. We're going to take that lands. There's no one there, a few huts and a few peasants, and we'll take that over, flank them on the left, and they were overrun.
So I mean, Samael had at his feet, he had the access keys for the male and the female
the most
which
powerful tools ever made.
Scary. So obviously Lutheran goes, guys, your Kudenkahl plan is not working. Let's revisit my plan, okay? So he argued again for the mission to Shayol Ghul, but the Aes Sedai had become even more worried about the risks, specifically about not placing the seals correctly and ripping the thing open. So the Hall actually voted to continue with the Kudenkahl plan and started working on how to smuggle the access keys out. But all the smugglers that attempted to do this thing were caught and killed or tortured, but not a single one of them gave away their mission, and therefore also never mentioned the access keys or where they ever were. So what this means is that not only did Samael not know where the access keys were, but they were actually scattered, and now the Aes Sedai themselves didn't know where the access keys were either. Now, Willie, you and I had discussed this previously, but we had not really gone down the whole thing. How did those access keys then make it to Rhuidean? Because they are there, lying right next to each other, placed carefully on the ground.
I have a theory. I always have theories. Most of them are wayward.
While you give us your theory, I would encourage the chat to please enlighten us. How do you think the Kudenkahl that went missing during the War of Shadow turned up in Rhuidean, if we know that the Ungreal, Terangreal, Sa'angreal, and Ungreal in Rhuidean were carted there by Jonai and his offspring? So go, Vil, what's your theory?
In the taking of the area where it was being made, that is undisclosed. We don't know where it is, but Samael took that lands. They were just hostage to the fact of an invading force. They managed to hide them, they being some Aes Sedai, and they would have stayed with them. They would have protected them to make sure no one would have gotten them, and someone probably stayed devoted. Now, yes, we're in invaded lands, but Anne Frank hid in a cellar for a very long time. People have hid well in invaded lands, and the same thing played out, in my opinion, to the point where they knew that now, after the breaking, it was equally as important to hide them still. Because if you get that into the hands of any male channeler, the world will be utterly destroyed. And they took it upon themselves, and through the connection of the Aes Sedai over that period, would have handed it down, and eventually they made it onto that train with the original Aiel, the Jen Aiel, and made its way to Rhuidean. My question more is, where did the second set come in? Because we know there's one broken one in Terrebonne, in the Panox Palace. Yeah. So is there still another spare key lying buried somewhere in the ground?
There might be even more. There might be 6, 12. Who knows? Those are the only 3 in all the books that we know of that have ever been found. The 2 that Rand finds in Ruidian, and the 1 that Egwene finds in the Panox Palace in Tel'aran'rhiod, when she actually tries to use it or something and drops it and it breaks, but then it's back. Yeah, interesting one. If anyone can let us know. I saw Kev make a comment about Samael and his platform shoes, which would explain why Samael had no fucking idea. So, okay, now these access keys are lost, and according to this historian's paper, and I'm assuming the manuscript that it's based on, they would be lost for millennia. Okay, so thousands of years these things are missing. Well, from them. So then the armies of Samael, Demandred, and Belal kept advancing, and they actually started threatening the Sa'angril themselves. They were pushing in on the lands where those 2 huge statues were.
And it was strategic by them as the generals that they were. They knew that was something we need to take. They didn't. I don't think they knew about the access keys. They thought it's something that you just stand by and channel through.
Or were so full of themselves that they thought they could use an Ungril that big without an access key. You know, like what their egos were like, right? All the Forsaken.
Massive.
The reason, it's just fucking douchebags, all of them. But yeah, so, you know, now the Light really, really in trouble. Apparently, like at this time as well, when those 3, Belal, Demandred, and Samael, so like the brilliant like military tacticians from the Shadow, when they were really, really pushing, the faction for peace within the Aes Sedai started growing in prominence again. And what they did is they were sort of
faction.
Well, they were arguing for like negotiating with the Forsaken.
One does not negotiate with the Dark. It just doesn't happen.
Well, they learned that the hard way, because everyone they sent to go negotiate with them came back and was later found with no success, and was later found to be acting on behalf of the Shadow. Some of them sometimes not even remembering what they've been done. So they're like, oh, cool, one of your friends has come to visit me. Compulsion. And now go back there and go sabotage every fucking thing you can.
It was part of their weaponry. We do know that. Now we got to move it on to the ending. We got to get to the ball because we are running out of time.
So the defeat for the Light looked inevitable, but the rift between the male and the female Aes Sedai became so hard and fast that they weren't even speaking. So no woman would ever entertain the idea of going and leading that circle at Shayol Ghul. So that's when Lews Therin decided there was no more time to waste. He assembled 113 other male Aes Sedai loyal to him, collectively known as the 100 Companions, and he could only muster 10,000 soldiers without the Hall of Servants actually catching wind. And I mean, this is him doing this sneakily. He sneakily got 113 male Aes Sedai together, 10,000 soldiers, and he went and he did it. And he goes to Shayol Ghul, and nobody knows exactly what happened right there, but let me list off the consequences for you quickly. All 10,000 soldiers, dead as disco, right?
Dead.
They didn't make it back. The seals were placed without ripping open the ball, as we know, but wow, well done, guys. You did it. It wasn't so hard after all. All it took was the death of 10,000 soldiers. And in a massive stroke of luck, maybe you want to write this off to Lews Therin's Tavera nature, the 13 most powerful Forsaken were at Shayol Ghul at the time, probably getting orders or something, and they were sealed in at the same time.
The thought pattern there that they were called in for a meeting is just too of a coincidence for me. But then I thought about it. Lews Therin being the Taveran that he is, massively so. It is just his being and putting that plan into action. That's like, okay, cool. Today's a good day for a recap. We're going to have a Friday barbecue, drinks. We're going to discuss how to take this war further. And
team building exercise.
Oh my goodness, what is happening?
Oh shit, we picked the wrong day, didn't we? So they all got sealed in there with him, with the Dark One. You know, some sealed more than others, but we won't elaborate on that too much. But with basically the head of the snake cut off here, I mean, we know that there were actually more Forsaken than just the 13. But I think there were 30 odd, something like that. But they were sort of prone to infighting, and especially after the top 13, the top gun generals were all trapped in the ball with the Dark One. The shadow spawn. Yeah, I know it distracts me every time. Damn you, Skitterish. The other generals and the other forces were sort of just left to infighting, and they took each other out, and they really started sputtering. And when the breaking, obviously, which we'll get to right now, started happening in earnest, their forces were scattered to the wind. So obviously, also what happened was the counterstroke from the Dark One at the moment of sealing the bore. It tainted Sidin, leaving Lews Therin, and there were only 68 surviving companions. 68. They all went insane instantly, right then and there. Boom, mad. So it couldn't have been too long before Lews Therin made it back to his castle, killed Ilyena and his whole family, killed everyone else, buggered off to the empty plain where Dragonmount now stands, and did his whole "I'm now a volcano" trick. But obviously the men that were there, they left trails of death and destruction in their wake within days. Like they just scattered from Shayol Ghul, trailing destruction. And the rest of the male channelers in the world steadily went mad, destroying everything, breaking the world, literally and figuratively. Like all forms of society and civilization completely broke down. As we read in those Ahil flashbacks, people reverted to their most base instincts. Everything was missing. Aes Sedai themselves were looking like, they broke holes in their dresses and stuff, and they all looked bedraggled, and it took a long, long time for everyone to sort of get things back together again. But even the physical world was broken, right? Like mountain ranges created and oceans drained and like tectonic plates shifting around everywhere. It's pretty messed up. People, the human race came to within an inch of extinction. So the strike at the bore had ended the war of power, but it started the breaking of the world. And that whole, the paper ends with a quote that I'll read here, which is pretty fitting. The most suitable comment surely comes from what appears to be the introduction of the fragmentary manuscript. And the quote is, "Whoever reads this, if any remain to read it, weep for us who have no more tears. Pray for us who are damned alive."
That was powerful.
Pretty heavy stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, apart from the way that the Coudenhall access keys made their way back to Ruidian, which to me is a bit of a mystery, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's interesting, like you said, the schism and the division within the Aes Sedai ranks themselves is what ultimately led to this flawed plan of Lews Therin taking only men. His original plan was to take the women, and we don't know how that would have worked out. But the inevitable, and it's almost sad to say this, but the inevitable divide between the men and the women. And I'm also getting distracted by all the donut jokes. It's just unfortunate that, it would fall along those lines again. And I know that, in recent weeks and months, especially with the show being on TV, there's a lot of talk about
just
the gender politics.
Kev makes a really good point about the
jam donuts
access keys. No, not the jam donuts, the access keys. The Aiel going there to make them, or the Aes Sedai would have had their Aiel as they were the servants to the Aes Sedai. They could have already at that point been given them and say, go. Whatever you do, just move with these things. They cannot be found. So, I mean, that could have been almost a start of that movement of the Aiel, the Gen Aiel, guarding those things, knowing the importance of what they actually have. With time, the importance got lost. Like, why are we even guarding? What are these things? We've got red door frames, and we've got a little tortoise-shaped men. It's like, what are these things? We're just carting them around for thousands of years. But maybe that was just already there. Like, hey, take this and go.
The only thing I would say to that is that then the communications between the Aes Sedai that I would be assuming are working on creating these access keys and the people back at the Hall of Servants would have had to be broken down if there were multiple attempts at smuggling coordinated from
There's
Paradisen or
we
wherever
we've
the Hall of
we have
Servants was.
established that the communication in Randland is appallingly poor. Pigeons don't arrive. That's the one thing that, with all their might and power in the Age of Legends, they could not get right, is to establish a form of communications about vast distances that got the message through on time.
But they had
So
those iPhone Terangriel to use.
they were local. They could only phone in the city. No rural access. Bad reception.
But look, I mean, you raise a valid point, or Kev raises a valid point, that the creation of the access keys would have had to been overseen by Aes Sedai. There's no one else who's going to make them, right? So where there's Aes Sedai, I think it's safe to assume that there would
Aes Sedai as well.
And smart, like the thing about the Age of Legends is that they weren't just powerful, they were also extremely clever. The Sharom, the giant sphere that floats over the Column Down, the university, this epitome of education and learning, that Sharom was floating without the use of the one power. It was all gravitational and magnetic fields and stuff. It was science. They were
physics.
Super, super smart. So I mean, yes, there would be Aiel around the Aes Sedai that are making the access keys. And if they do have, a directive from somewhere central to say, look, we're going to send all the Aiel around just to keep moving using, the wagons full of Terangriel and Ungriel and Sangriel, they'd have to coordinate that over vast distances, I would assume. The only departure of Aiel with wagons from an Age of Legends city is the Aiel led by Jonai, who leave Paradisen, the capital, with their tens of thousands of Aiel and their wagons and wagons. But I mean, there'd be Terangriel and Ungriel and Sa'Ungriel all over the world. So if that was the plan, to move all these things, constantly until they find a place of safety, then they would have had to communicate to other areas where there would be Aes Sedai with Aiel and their, various collection of types of Ungriel. But okay, so that plasters over it a little bit for me. I thought it was a bit of a continuity error, but I guess you can explain it as someone leaving from somewhere else, and secreting away these Khut Khal.
The idea that the Genaiel could, for generations and years, live true to this last quest or mission that they were given by the Aes Sedai servants. It wasn't kind of one generation that started moving and oh, well, grandpa and grandma's dead now, I ain't doing this stuff anymore. That only happened and created two rifts in multiple generations. They were true to their core, true to their mission, and they said, oh, well, we're doing this. If we find anything that's weird, pick it up, put it in a box, chuck it on the wagon. We're taking that with as well, because we were told to look after these weird things. They have secret powers. Keep on moving. Keep on trucking.
Just keep on keeping on.
Keep on.
The other question would be where did that broken one in Tanchico come from? And how many others are there? We'll never know.
Maybe, you can't say that, because when Ygritte got quite close to it, she could feel the evil or the power of it. It was visceral, and that was in the World of Dreams as well. So you can't say that it was maybe a fake or something, a decoy to throw them off. Maybe it was. Maybe it was a decoy for one of the other leftover Forsaken that weren't sealed off. Hey, get this thing, try and channel through it, and then it blows up in your hand. Because we do know Terangriel or Ungriels in that manner has been made as little traps. We have one that was set up in book 4. So potentially, it's a broken one that was a decoy. I mean, so much is lost from that period of time. I mean, we're filling blanks with speculation, but it is plausible.
Yeah.
Was it a male or a female half one? It was the female half one.
I was female, I think, because Egwene had a sort of an affinity for it. I was thinking maybe it was not even necessarily a purposeful decoy, but, in their haste to sort of go, shit, we've got these Sa'Ungriel, we don't know where the access keys are, maybe let's try and make more of them. They got part ways through it before they got interrupted or something. And maybe it wasn't complete. And maybe that's why not all the sort of the redundancies and safeguards and stuff that you would expect in a and a high power weapon like that maybe weren't put in
Cool.
place.
We've made prototype 1 and 2. We're busy with production model number 3. Things went wrong. So, hey, whenever NASA makes something to send up to a planet, they make a duplicate that stays on Earth so that they can work on it and test on it. So it makes sense if they were that achieved scientists to die, that they would have a test model, one to stay behind. They might have been in the process of making the male half final model when they got interrupted. And they said, okay, cool, we got to go with the 2 prototypes. Send them off. This one is partial. Let's just break it over here and keep on keeping on, as you say. So, I mean, that could very well be. Because, I mean, if they were the full production models, Rand wouldn't have been able to destroy them, which he did.
I think the female one, and now we're venturing out of our area of expertise, right? We're only on our way to finish the Shadow Rising at the moment, but I'm pretty sure massive book spoilers coming up. The female one was destroyed during the cleansing of Saidin, cleansing of Saidin. It's the Saidar version. The female one was destroyed during that activity. And then at one point when Rand goes up to Dragon Mountain, he sort of has his moment of enlightenment. He draws as much of the power as he can through the Kuden Kal and channels it back into the thing, shattering it and destroying it. And much to the chagrin of those who would seek to employ its power for their own gains.
Well, that was a very good wrap up of that history lesson, I'd say.
It's a cool story, and I mean, obviously we glossed over quite a lot there. The actual reading of it is quite dry, but like I said, on our Twitter feed, you can go find the link to the short story itself. It's hosted on Dragon Mount. It's just called The Strike of Shayol Ghul. If you Google that, you should be able to find it. It's an interesting read, and like we said at the beginning, canon, right? So this is like Robert Jordan wrote this stuff, and it's just cool to get these extra little tidbits of information. So if the voices of Willie and myself have not grated your ears too harshly, and you are interested in hearing what we ramble on about during our rereads of the books, feel free to check out our podcast. This is called Blood and Ashes Podcast on all major streaming platforms for podcasts. We've got a fledgling YouTube channel that, we started putting up some videos for dealing with the show and our reactions to it. As I mentioned before, the third leg of our dysfunctional tripod is not around, unfortunately, due to personal reasons, which has sort of put a halt on our YouTube content creation. But I think we will definitely be putting up some post-season 1 thoughts and deep dives. Much like our podcast, it will be full spoilers. So we're really limiting ourselves in terms of audiences, but we are so enthusiastic and so stoked about the books that we like to just spoil it all and talk about everything. So check us out.
Yeah, absolutely.
You really should, everyone. It's a great podcast. I've listened to a few here and there. It's the 3 of them are hilarious to listen to. So it's been really fun listening to you. I enjoyed putting up the comments, particularly about the donuts, just to see if I can break you.
You almost did, you bastard.
I think I got Will a little bit. So, but that was
That's
fun.
all for a good cause.
Indeed.
Apparently, our words sing in people's earballs and eye drums. So, thanks for that.
While we're bringing up chat comments, do you have someone from chat that you think deserves to go in the draw?
It's very hotly contested, but Kev was a great contributor, I must say. There.
Kev?
So he needs an extra ticket in the draw.
I will put Kev in the draw. Have no fear. So it's it was really funny things going on there. The donut one in particular got me. I was like, that's brilliant. I'm so impressed with that. So
the situation with the Forsaken and Shayol Ghul is pretty laughable. So
it
is.
Yeah.
It is.
I told my roommate, I was like, look at what Kevin and Skeeter are doing. And they laughed as well. It's like, this is brilliant. So
love it.
But yeah.
And there we have it. Thanks again to Rob from Melchior Talks and the gentleman from the Black Tower podcast and everyone else that helped make the WoTaHoliday charity stream possible. It really was a lot of fun and a lot of good stuff came out of that. You could probably hear from the audio quality that this was taken straight off the YouTube video, so don't hold me accountable for that. But you guys are more than welcome to send your feedback and, theories and questions, like always, to all the regular social media links, all in the description of this episode. And I'll add links to the actual video streams on YouTube and the other content creators like Rob and the Black Tower podcast in the episode description as well. And with that, hopefully you will hear from all three of us, myself, Willie, and Jody, again real soon. Until then, cheers.